Good morning, everybody. Well, if you missed this exciting lesson, today we're going to be talking about shading. Now, shading, what is that? What does shading even mean? Shading is actually the act of adding a little bit of shadow or shade to a drawing to give it a three-dimensional feeling, to give it a three-dimensional look. And you do that in a number of different ways, but you can see the effects here. So here's your basic line drawing of a rose, right? Now, if you added some shadow or shading, a little bit of darkness, to the areas where the pieces come together, where two things interact, like these petals, when they're like where the petals interact, that's where you're going to see shadow or shading. When you add that little bit of darkness, it really brings a drawing out. It really makes it feel three-dimensional. So there's several different ways you can do this. One of the most common types for things like comic books or anything that you were using like ink or paint, pen and ink sort of thing, is called cross-hatching. And this is a good example of it. And you've seen this, even if you don't know the term cross-hatching, you've seen this in comics and comic books, things like that. Here's a good example of some basic, simple shapes that use cross-hatching as a method. Okay? You can do it in different ways. You can do it straight up and down. You can do it side to side. You can do it sort of random. It's kind of up to you. But you can see how, basically, when you're doing it, the fewer lines coming together is where things look lighter, and where there's more lines coming together, things look darker. All right. Another way of shading, a common way of shading, is called stippling. And stippling is one of those techniques. It's really a lot like cross-hatching, really, when you think about it. It's just a lot more ink in one area and less ink in another area. Stippling actually is very similar to the way that they actually first figured out how to print tones of gray in newspapers and in books and things. Before they had computers and the ability to print in all kinds of different colors of inks, all they really could print in was one color of ink, usually black ink. And if you wanted to make something look realistic, you wanted to have tones of color, gradations of color, gradations of gray, really. And they did that using what was called Benday Dots. And you've seen maybe these in different art pieces where they have all these big dots. Well, that's the same idea as stippling. It's the dots here are much more crowded together, and then over here they're much farther apart, and it shows sort of a gradation of tone. Stippling is actually can be a lot of fun, and it can be sort of like Zentangle, where it's just like almost like gets you into a meditative state doing it. The most common kind of shading is what I would just call regular pencil shading, and that's where you take, usually your pencil, and I usually hold it with my finger like this, and you rub this edge side to side on your paper. That's the most common kind of shading. It's probably, if you've done shading before, it's probably what you've done. Real common. You can do it. You press harder, you press lighter. That's how you get the different gradations of tone. And you can also use a Kleenex to rub it, your thumb to rub it, or we have a really cool tool called a smudge stick. And you probably have seen these sitting on my desk if you're in class. If not, you can find them in a lot of different places. It's basically rolled compressed paper. And you use it, finger here, you use it to rub, and it will smudge the pencil into a nice, smooth, even tone. And here's a good example of a circle using sort of regular pencil shading. All right, so that's, in a nutshell, that's the basic 3 types of shading. So what's your assignment? First, I want you to practice each of the 3 techniques that I showed you on 2 simple shapes. So you'll have a total of 6 small sketches. So basically what I'm expecting is you to draw a little square or a cube and a little circle or a sphere, and you'll do 2 of those, and you'll have cross hatching on those, then you'll do another one set, and you'll do stippling on those, and you do another set, and you do pencil shading on those. So you should have a square and a circle for each one of those types of shading. And then I want you to do a full-fledged drawing using shading. This should be probably an object. You could do an animal. You could even do a cartoon if you want. I've seen some really neat cartoon-style drawings that have added shading to make them sort of look three-dimensional, which is pretty cool. But it needs to be a full-page, full-size drawing. It doesn't need to be something that takes you a week, but it also should not be something you finish in 10 minutes. This should be something that takes you at least a class period to do. So that's what I'm looking for on the shading. And then when you are done, make sure you go into Canvas and fill out the quiz for the shading page and get that turned in. All right. That will be due at the end of next week, which if you're I don't know when you're watching this, of course, but that would be the 25th of September, depending on when you're watching this. I guess if you're watching this really late, it doesn't really matter. Okay, so have fun, and I'm looking forward to seeing what you get.